Om Om Prithvi Shantirantariksha Shantir Dyav Shantir Disha Shantiravantara Disha Shantiragni Shantir Vayu Shantiraditya Shantish Chandrama Shantir Nakshatrani Shantirapa Shantiroshadaya Shantir Vanaspataya Shantir Gau Shantiraja Shantirashva Shantir Purusha Shantir Brahma Shantir Brahmana Shantir Shantireva Shanti Shantir me Astu Shantihi. May there be peace on earth and in the sky. May there be peace in the water and in all directions. May there be peace in the plants, in the trees, and in animals. May there be peace in the hearts of all beings. May there be peace in everyone and in everything. Sarvetra sukhinas santu, sarve santu niramayaha, sarve bhadrani pashyantu, ma kaschit dukkha bhag bhavet, sarvastaratu durgani, sarvo bhadrani pashyatu, Sarva sadbuddhimapnotu, sarva sarvatra nandatu. May all be happy and healthy. May all see what is good, and may no one experience misery. May all overcome their obstacles and acquire good tendencies. May people everywhere find joy and fulfillment. Let us now spend some time touching the center of peace and joy in our hearts. A good way to begin the practice is to withdraw the scattered energies of the mind and bring them to rest on one point. That point can be our own breathing. Let us therefore practice breathing with awareness. As we breathe in, let us visualize that our body and mind are being filled with love, strength, and compassion. And as we breathe out, let us release all the exhaustion, stress, and anxiety in our body and mind. Let us practice this way for a while. Let us now turn our attention to the region of our heart. Although God is present everywhere and in everyone, the divine presence can be felt most clearly in our own hearts. We can meditate in any way we have been taught. To remain focused, we can take the help of a short mental prayer or a mantra or a divine name. Let us now spend some time dwelling on the presence of God in our hearts. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om. Om Asatoma Satkamaya Tamasoma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya Aviravirmayeti Rudrayatte Dakshinam Mukham Te Namam Pahi Nityam. May the Divine lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May the Divine Consciousness fill our hearts and protect us. So we'll continue reflecting on some of the important themes in the Gita. The interesting thing about these ancient scriptures is that every time you slice and dice them in different directions, you get to see a facet of it which we may not have noticed before. And so it's helpful to study these texts not just in a one mechanical sort of way, but to find creative ways of studying them, relating them to our life, and seeing not just how much we know about it, but how we can live according to it. So one of the things we might notice in the Gita is that in the beginning, the second chapter where Krishna begins his teaching, it's very philosophical, very abstract, the nature of the self and so on. And then the middle chapters of the Gita answer many of the questions that Arjuna has after listening to what Krishna had to say in chapter 2. And then as we come to the concluding chapters of the Gita, we find Krishna coming down, as it were, from that height of abstraction to something more concrete, something more tangible. And that's usually the classical form of teaching. You state the principle, and then you show how that principle becomes more concrete in our day-to-day lives. So chapter 17 of the Gita, chapter 16 is called Daiva Asura Sampat Yoga. Daiva Asura Sampat Yoga. So there are two treasures. You could even call this chapter the Yoga of Divine Treasures. The word for divine treasure in Sanskrit is Daivi Sampat, or divine wealth, or divine state. So in the first 3 verses of this chapter, Krishna describes, if you count them, I think it's about, in my counting, it came to about 26 essential qualities of people who have this divine wealth. And then followed by that, he describes the qualities, what's called Asura Sampat. Well, if you take it literally, it would mean demonic wealth. The qualities that people with materialistic tendencies, people with destructive tendencies have. Now, it might seem at first sight that Krishna is speaking about two kinds of people. Good people, spiritually oriented people, and what we sometimes dismiss as worldly people. And the qualities seem to be separated. And that's how sometimes we try to look at the world, as just cut and dried. These are good guys, bad guys, good people, bad people. It's not always helpful to look at the world that way. In fact, Krishna himself suggests in the Gita that this entire living experience that we have is not so let me put it this way. There is a lot of gray area in between. That is, there is nothing which is 100% good in the world, just that there is nothing which is 100% evil. So if we look at things which we would normally characterize as good, if we really look deeply into it, with some amount of effort, we might be able to find something that, some bad outcome that comes even from an extremely good thing. And if we look at something which is terrible and awful, and if we again, with some effort, we might see that even in something which is terrible, maybe a little bit of good comes out somewhere. Maybe it's totally unintentional. And that seems to make sense because we just look at our own life. We just look at in our own hearts. How many of us can say, I'm 100% good? Also, how many can you even say, I'm 100% bad? It's never like that. There is always a mixture. There are elements in our heart which are positive, healthy, uplifting, good. But there are also elements in our own heart which are not so positive, which may be unhealthy, which may be weakening. All of you are familiar with the story of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, right? And so that's, of course, it's kind of, that story illustrates a very important truth. It does it in a very dramatic sort of way, but we could say that both those aspects are there in our heart. And the tensions and the stress and conflict that we sometimes experience in our life is between these two opposing tendencies in our heart. So what I will do now is just read to you. It's a long list. There are 26 qualities. So I'll just read out to you the 26 qualities that Krishna mentions as belonging to what he calls a part of a divine wealth. And we all can then look in our own hearts and ask ourselves, how wealthy I am. There's another kind of wealth that we are familiar with, but there's another one, a bank that we always carry in our heart. So we're to say how wealthy we are by just kind of going through this checklist. Again, a lot of these qualities, we may not always be able to say, I have it or I don't have it. Maybe we have them, but it may be in different proportions. Maybe we have all of these 26, maybe 10% of something and 20% of something else and so on. So in some sense, every one of us is a kind of a work in progress. And for spiritual seekers, it is good to acknowledge that. It's good to not have any complexes, neither a superiority complex nor an inferiority complex. Just be realistic about ourselves. And that's a great lesson to learn, being honest with oneself. Well, we have to be honest with everyone, but we know that honesty, like everything else in life, begins at home, begins in our own heart. Because if I cannot be honest with my own self, then I can only then put forward a mask of honesty in the world in which I dwell. I'm not suggesting that you just go and wash your dirty laundry in public. That's not what I'm saying. But I don't have to go on advertising to the world my weaknesses. But at least I must know in my own heart what are the things I need to work on. What are my drawbacks? Only a person who is fully aware of their strengths and their weaknesses can really make progress in spiritual life. Now, in order to make that assessment, a little bit of ego reduction is very important. We are sometimes better at judging other people than judging our own selves. And that is because there is a space. I'm able to objectify the people and things around me. And because I'm able to objectify them, I can, accepting the biases and prejudices that we all have, do as good a job of judging others as it may be possible for us. But judging oneself is difficult because there is really no space. How can I objectify myself? And people who are very highly egoistic cannot do that. And so some amount of ego reduction is important to at least metaphorically separate myself from myself. It's almost like standing outside of myself and asking, who is this person? What does this person know? What does this person lack? And to the extent we are able to do it well, we may be in a position to make better decisions in life, to choose well going forward. Because if I have to make good choices, I must know the person for whom those choices are being made. And therefore, all of these qualities that Krishna gives, we might see that some of them we have in good measure, some of them we may have in lesser measure. So let me go through those qualities. So some of these qualities are in a positive language, in a sense that this is what I should have. And some of them are described in a negative way, that what I should not have or what I should not do. So here is this list, long list, get ready, 26. First, fearlessness. The Sanskrit word is abhaya. Swami Vivekananda once famously said that it's in Vedanta alone that highest experience is identified with fearlessness. Oftentimes, when we speak about someone and we say, this is a God-fearing person, we say it in a very positive way. We mean that it's a good religious person. So the presence of fear is sometimes seen as a positive way, that I'm God-fearing. But if we kind of take that phrase, God-fearing, and try to, again, as I said in the beginning, dissect it in different ways, we might be able to ask the question, do we have to fear God? Or why should I be afraid of God? Do love and fear go together? If I truly love someone, will there be fear in my heart from that person? And that it might seem as if the two don't go together. That the more love I develop toward God, the fear would go. Not respect, not reverence, that will remain, but fear. And so, in the Upanishads, in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, when King Janaka had gone to the sage Yajnavalkya to learn about the highest knowledge of Brahman from him, and as a result of receiving that teaching from the sage, and after practicing that, he attained that state of enlightenment. Now, how is that attainment of the state described in the Upanishad? Yajnavalkya says, Abhayam vai Janaka praptosi. O King Janaka, now you have reached the state of fearlessness. Abhaya, exactly the same word that Krishna uses here. Have we ever experienced that kind of fearlessness in our lives? And the answer is strangely yes, every day. When we are fast asleep, when we are not even dreaming, in that state of deep sleep, we have no fear. So we do experience fearlessness every day, at least for a few minutes, but it's a state of unconsciousness. We are not conscious. And so that fearlessness doesn't stay with us. When we wake up in the morning, all of our fears and anxieties and worries and everything is just waiting by the bedside. As soon as I wake up, it just pounces on me. The reason I'm free from fear in the state of deep sleep is because there is no duality, there is no multiplicity, there is no diversity, there is no nothing. There is nothing there. Just being is present in deep sleep. There is a portion in the Taittiriya Upanishad which says that Dvitiyatvai bhayam bhavati, as long as, even if there is one other entity in the world, there is the potentiality of fear present. And so the total fearlessness can come when just the one exists. And that is why he just begins this list of divine qualities by saying the state of fearlessness, abhayam, purity of heart, sattva samshuddhihi. Swami Vivekananda often said that one teaching we find, blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Swami Vivekananda said, if all the scriptures in the world were destroyed, and if just this one statement remained, survived, there is still hope for humanity. And so purity of heart, a lot we can think about this idea. What does purity mean? What does a pure heart mean? So that's the second quality. Then jnana yoga vyavasthitihi, focus on experience. Sometimes our spiritual life and practice can unconsciously take a detour. It's like this: when you are driving and you do not know there is a construction going on, and then you are thinking of something, or you are chatting with the person next to you, and then you might take a wrong exit. Or you might take an exit without knowing you have taken an exit. Spiritual life also, such things can happen. One of the ways that exit can take place is our spiritual life can get reduced to just reading or to just talking about it. Now, they are important. Reading is important in life. Discussing spiritual topics is important. But if that becomes all of my spirituality, then there is a problem. Then there is the question of food. Yes, food, and how much do we eat and what we eat. These are important questions. But if all of my religious experience and practice is reduced to just eating, Swami Vivekananda said that religion has entered into the cooking pot for many people. Some of these temples in India, certainly I have seen, where there is such meticulous care taken about the food and what time the food should be offered and how it should be cooked. And these are good. These are amazing in many ways. It's a great discipline. But oftentimes we find the entire day is spent in just thinking about food. And then we have to say, well, there's something wrong somewhere. There's just the proportion of how much, where something fits is not quite right. And so, what Swami Vivekananda, I keep on mentioning Swami Vivekananda because I think for me personally, and I guess for many of us, the understanding of spiritual life has come through reading, especially for Vedanta students, about reading from Vivekananda and the the light he throws upon it, which is more understandable for those of us in the 20th and now 21st century. And what he pointed out was that the basis of spiritual life is ultimately experience. It's not how many books I have attended, how many lectures I have heard, how many retreats I have gone to, how much pilgrimage I have done. All of those things are good. But ultimately, what have I experienced? Ultimately, who I am as a person at this moment. At the moment of death, nothing is going to matter. Well, how big a scholar I am, or how much charity I have done, all those things nothing will matter. Ultimately, what will matter is, who am I right now? How much my heart has changed? How better a person I am now than what I was 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. Otherwise, if nothing here has changed, and God forbid, if things haven't gotten worse here, then all of these other accomplishments in life would amount to nothing. And that is why it means focus on experience. Jnana yoga vyavasthitihi. Dana, charity. Later on in the Gita, Krishna will point out that even charity is of three kinds. There's the three gunas. There is a charity dominated by the sattva, charity dominated by tamas, and charity dominated by rajas. And that charity will take different forms depending on whichever of these gunas is dominant. Self-restraint, dhamma, selfless participation in life's cycles, that is what yajna means. Study, swadhyaya. I like to often think of swadhyaya in terms of not just reading books, but there is the word swa. Self-study, applying what I read to my own specific life situation. Because books, think about it this way. Teaching itself can be given in many different ways. There is one-on-one teaching. When the teacher has only the student in front, the teacher knows the student well, the student knows the teacher well. So then the teacher is able to give the teaching, the level of teaching and the way it is taught, which is good for that student's progress. But then when you have a mass scale teaching, when you have a large number of people in front of you, not everyone has the same background, not everyone's needs are same, not everyone's ability to comprehend is same. And so oftentimes, such generic teachings tend to be generic. And so in order to benefit from these things, books for instance, you pick up a book and you start reading, the author didn't write that book only for you. The author wants lots of copies to be sold. So a lot of people are going to read it in different parts of the world, people of different age groups and so on. So that teaching can become truly beneficial to me if I read and then apply it to my own case and ask myself, if this makes sense, I don't have to accept anything blindly, but if this makes sense, how can I start living according to it? That's the question we have to ask. Some of the things we might find, well, it's not something I can start practicing from tomorrow morning. That's fine. Some of the things we might find not quite relevant in my case, which is fine also. Not everything has to be relevant for everybody. But just because something is not relevant now, doesn't mean it's never going to be relevant. Maybe after 5 years from now, or 10 years from now, when my situation will have changed a little bit, I will suddenly remember, oh, long back I had read that book, or I had heard that. Now I know what it means. Now that teaching is so helpful to me. So it wasn't relevant to me 5 years ago, but now it is. And therefore, as long as we trust the source, the authenticity of the source from which that wisdom comes, we can take it in, reflect on it, if it is relevant to me at that time, that stage, apply it, or just hold it somewhere in the corner of the heart and recognize that it might become relevant at some point in future. So that is study. Then tapas, focus on the essentials. Arjava, simplicity. Satya, truthfulness. Tyaga, detachment. A lot of these things are not new to all of you. We have discussed these many times in the class before. Tranquility, shanti, compassion, daya, gentleness, mardava, modesty, ri, inner depth, teja, forgiveness, kshama. Forgiveness, there's again a lot that can be said on forgiveness. Among the things that we can think about it, it's also helpful to ask ourselves. Sometimes we refuse to forgive somebody and say, I'm never going to forgive that. And if we reflect on it, it sometimes seems to me that forgiveness is primarily for oneself, not for anybody else. So if there is one person who has done something to me, and I'm so mad, so angry, so hurt, and I say, I'm never going to forgive that, how does it affect that person? That person maybe just doesn't care whether that person is forgiven or not. I am the one who is holding that anger, that hurt in my heart. I'm the one who is suffering. On the other hand, if I forgive others, I have gotten that hurt and anger from within me, I have released it. So really, forgiveness, although it might seem as if I'm doing it something for others, really, oftentimes, it might be benefiting one's own self. So again, this is not the only thing about forgiveness. There is a lot to reflect on it, but this is one point that often comes to my mind. Then Driti, fortitude. Driti also means finding ways to renew our tired body and mind. We know that carrying out our duties and responsibilities and doing all the different chores that we all do, the body and mind do get exhausted. And different people might have different strategies of how to renew one's own body and mind. The ability to renew one's body and mind well, and that comes under Driti as well. Purity, shaucha, non-injury, ahimsa. Ahimsa is sometimes called ahimsa paramo dharmaha, the highest virtue. And the reason is that if someone takes the quality of non-violence or non-injury seriously, we might see that just practicing non-injury, both in a gross and subtle way, all of these or most of these other qualities will automatically come. And that's one important thing to remember. Although it's a pretty long list, many of these are just interconnected. It's like sometimes you have these water creepers, and let's say a tank is filled with these creepers. Sometimes you don't have to go and you want to remove them from that water tank. You don't necessarily have to kind of pick them all up one by one. You just start pulling one, and you will see gradually all others will come. And these qualities are like that. We don't necessarily have to list all these 26 and keep on checking them, which also we can do if they want. But even if we just hold on to any one of these qualities and say, I'm going to practice this to perfection, and we will see even that one quality, while trying to perfect myself in it, all these other qualities will automatically come alongside that. Akrodha, absence of anger. Absence of anger would also mean the ability to calm down one's anger. Sometimes we might get angry suddenly, but so akrodha doesn't mean simply not getting angry. It also means the ability to calm oneself down as soon as one becomes aware of that seed of anger in one's heart. Apaishuna means non-slandering. Recently there was a poll done in the UK, a survey, in which they asked the question, have you ever seriously wished death upon someone? And the poll results were about 30% of the people said, not that they went and killed anybody, but in their heart, they wished someone were dead. Now, 30% is a pretty big number. But if you look at the other way, well, at least 70% of the people didn't wish that other people should die. So this is one thing that we can ask ourselves. When we think about non-injury or non-violent, doesn't necessarily mean we need to go and physically beat someone or hurt someone. But even holding such thoughts in the mind that, well, something bad might happen to someone, that is also violence. At an even more subtle level, harboring thoughts of jealousy, being jealous of others, is also violence. So you see, even such thing as having not thinking positively about someone can violate that quality of non-violence or non-injury. Then aloluptva means absence of greed, absence of envy. Achapula, which means absence of fickleness, which will include unnecessary talking or moving of hands and feet. I do that sometimes, and I've suddenly become aware I'm moving my hands too much. Absence of hatred, adroha, absence of pride, nati manita. So I've just read out to you the 26 qualities that Krishna mentions as belonging to people who have this divine wealth. Now, in the next set of verses from 7 to 18 in that chapter, Krishna gives the other side of it, the qualities which are of a non-divine state, asuri sampat. Only 10, the number is small. So let me just give a quick reading for that as well. 1, ignorance about what should be done, what should not be done. And we have to admit that there are occasions in life when we don't know what is the right thing to do. We are not sure what the right thing is. So that is 1. 2, absence of purity. You can see some of these are just the direct negatives of the list that I read before. Absence of good conduct, absence of truthfulness, absence of faith. So 5 absences. Then the presence of insatiable desire, presence of hypocrisy, presence of pride, presence of arrogance, and presence of anger. So pretty much the opposite of whatever the list that we had before would amount to the Asuri Sampat. In verses 21 and 22, which are also very important, I'll read the verses to you. This is what Krishna says. Trividham narakasyedam dvaram nashanam kama krodhas tatha lobha tasmat etat trayam tyachet. Etair vimuktav kaunteya tamodvarais tribhir naraha acharati atmanashreyaha tato yati param gatim. Desire, anger, and greed is the triple door to hell, which destroys the self. Therefore, these 3 should be renounced. One who gets beyond these triple door to darkness practices what is good for the self and thus reaches the goal supreme. Naraka, translated here as hell, although many people tend to think of heaven and hell as places, it's also possible to think about these terms in terms of the experience that they generate. Because we normally think of heaven as a place where we'll experience bliss and joy and freedom, and hell as a place where there'll be pain and suffering and sorrow of different kinds. And so when it is said here, desire, anger, and greed is the triple door to hell, it need not necessarily mean that it will take me to a certain place, which it could. But what it means is that these three can produce pain, sorrow, and suffering, which will be the kind of experience people have in a hell. So if I'm experiencing pain, sorrow, and suffering to the extreme right now, I don't have to die to go to hell. I'm in hell right now. On the other hand, if I'm experiencing peace, joy, freedom, in whatever measure at this moment, I'm experiencing the bliss of heaven at this moment. So it's not to think in terms of heaven and hell as something that will happen, only a post-mortem experience, something that will happen when I die. I can be experiencing it right now. I think it was in Milton's Paradise Lost, that statement. The mind is its own place. It can make a heaven out of hell and hell out of heaven. So ultimately, it all boils down to the mind. If my mind is in a good shape, if my mind is healthy, positive, I'm in heaven right now. If my mind is troubled, conflicted, filled with irrational desires and ambitions and greed and envy, well, I'm suffering right now. I'm in hell right now. That's the idea. And so he says in this verse that these three, the seeds of all the pain and suffering, desire, anger, and greed, these three should be renounced. Now, the word desire, and I've said this often gets demonized in religious literature. But we must understand in what sense the word desire is used. Because it's not just like desire is bad. The question that needs to be asked is, desire for what? Because desire for God, desire for spiritual life, desire for a spiritual ideal, one might say, well, that is desire too. Well, that's not bad. So it's not just desire that's bad, but a desire that leads me, a desire for perishable entities that leads me either now or potentially in the future through pain and suffering, that kind of desire will not do me any lasting good. So whenever desire is condemned in religious literature, it is not just any random desire, but you say desire that will take me away from my own good, desire that will create greater bondage for me. Oftentimes the question comes is, how will I know what's right for me, what is not right for me? Well, it's not that this is a question that comes all the time. Most of the time, if I have good common sense, I will know what is the right thing for me to do. But there could be situations when, in spite of my common sense, I still might not be sure of what is the right way to go forward. To that, Krishna says in verse 24, Tasmat shastram pramanam te karya karya vyavasthitau jnatva shastra vidhanoktam karma kartum iharhasi. So let the scripture be your authority in determining what should be done, what should not be done. Having known what is said in the scripture, you should act. So the process is clear. Scripture, the teacher who helps us understand the heart of what is in the scripture, and then the practice. Again, in none of these cases, a blind following is recommended. Whether it's from the scripture or from any trusted source that we learn something, we have all been endowed through God's grace with some intellect, some reasoning, the faculty to to reason things out. So don't surrender your freedom to reason things out. Accept only what makes sense to you. But also have that willpower. If something resonates with your head and heart, if something your own heart says, yes, this makes sense, then don't stop there. Don't let it remain simply an intellectual understanding. Somehow see how that can descend into the heart so that I become a better human being, a better person. Something changes in the way I am, changes for the better. Because as I said, that will what will survive death. All the intellectual knowledge that I have is stored in my brain, and brain is a part of the body. And after the body is destroyed, the brain is destroyed. So none of that is going, your hard drive is gone. But if something has changed me as a person, then that will remain. So even if I die unenlightened, what will stay with me, what will not be lost, is how I have become a better person, how I have changed my life, how I have transformed myself. That gain will not be lost. Even if I have to be born again, I will have that gain. But the amount of things that I have read and so on, all those things will be lost. We will have to go to school once again if we are reborn. You can't say, well, I did my school last birth, I can't do it now. It doesn't work that way. And finally, Arjuna's question was to Krishna, what is my nature? And that's not true. After hearing from Krishna these qualities of this divine wealth and the non-divine wealth, Arjuna was like, but who am I? Which category would I belong to? And then Krishna says, Daivi sampat vimokshaya nibandhaya surimata ma shucha sampadam daivim abhijato pandava. The divine treasures lead to liberation. The demonic state leads to bondage. Grieve not, O Arjuna, you are born with divine treasures. So now and then, deep in our prayers, we might consider asking to whichever way you pray and to whoever you pray, whichever way you think of God, sometimes it might be good to ask, God, where do I belong in this whole list? And see what answer you get. Sri Ramakrishna was often fond of asking. We see in his conversations in the Gospel of Ramakrishna, he was very fond of asking to people, what do you think of me? Just to see what their understanding of him was. And I think we can kind of throw back the question to the divine being and say, what do you think of me? Where am I? And this is a whole different topic in itself. But I think one of the things that we could ask is, when we pray and when we get answers to our prayers, who is it that answers our prayers? Who answers our prayers? Think about it. I'm not giving any answer right now because that's really the question. Who answers my prayer? And whatever answer we get at that moment about who answers my prayers, we could say is my present understanding of who God is. And it's good to have some provisional answers in our lives, but never have that fanaticism or dogmatism to think that what answer I have now is the ultimate, is like the final answer. It's good to hold our convictions a little bit lightly. Hold them, treasure them, because they are the result of your own reflection, on your own practice, your own experience. But also be open to new ways of understanding, new experiences. And in the light of those things, some of our long-held ideas and thoughts may need revision. And it needs great amount of boldness to be able to say, okay, this was how I have thought about it all these years. But now, in the light of what I have heard or what I have experienced, what I have thought about, I feel that that understanding needs to be changed a little bit. Because only if we are willing to change and modify ourselves, only then will progress occur. Because sometimes we might think that, oh, nothing much is changing in my life. I have been doing meditation, I have been doing prayer, I have been doing this, I have been doing that, and nothing much is changing. And the reason may be not that what I'm doing is wrong, but I'm not willing to change. Something is, some of my long-held pet ideas and beliefs, I'm so clinging to them that even when other ideas want to help me move forward, there is a resistance. The imagery that is sometimes provided in books is of a person who is rowing a boat. And he rows all night and next morning finds he's still where he was before because the boat was anchored and it just didn't move. So all of that effort was useless. So that is something we all have to be conscious about also. That as we do our spiritual practices, as we try to advance in life, find that you're not kind of stuck somewhere which really hinders the progress. So a lot of these ideas come in the 16th chapter of the Gita. So whenever you get a chance, please open your copies of the Gita and reread those chapters again and again and reflect on some of these ideas and some of the newer other ideas that might also come to your mind as a result of your own thinking. Om Jananim Saradam Devim Ramakrishnam Jagadgurum Padapadme Tayo Shritva Pranamami Muhurmuhu. On Wednesday, we will continue the study of Viveka Chudamani as we have been doing at 7:30 in the evening. On Saturday next, we will have our meditation at 6 o'clock as usual. And since we have been doing the Gita for a long time, it would be good to have a little bit of change next Sunday. So we'll have a guest speaker, Pravrajika Vrajapranaji, for Vedanta Society of Southern California in Santa Barbara. Many of you have had a chance to hear her. She has been here before. So she will be visiting. And so she will speak next Satsang, next Sunday, on the topic learning from nature. So that's the program going forward in the week ahead. So let's conclude with a prayer now. May the Divine Being, who is the Father in heaven of the Christians, Holy One of the Jewish faith, Allah of the Muslims, Buddha of the Buddhists, Tao of the Taoists, Ahura Mazda of the Zoroastrians, the Great Spirit of the Native Americans, and Brahman of the Hindus, lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May we be granted strength, freedom, and clear understanding. May we learn to see God in our own hearts and in everyone around us. May God bless us all. then fill our hearts with gratitude, grace and love. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all.